Hey guys, welcome. Ow, oh my god, that really hurt. Um, as you can tell, it's been a day out. I feel like I ripped my nose. So all the kids are home today. I don't really want to film where they are right now because they're just gonna jump all over this. So I really wanted to talk about low milk supply with you guys. I feel like I did make one of these videos a long time ago. And I wanted to kind of do an updated version and also talk about how low milk supply happens, what you can kind of do to avoid it slash bring your milk supply up, and some evidence-based sort of info about why low milk supply happens. And I keep seeing little things flying around me, so I don't really know what's happening. I definitely want to make it apparent that low milk supply is actually not rare, but it's uncommon for somebody to specifically not be able to make enough milk or make any breast milk. Apparently it's between 3 to 4% of the population, which I guess technically is a fairly big number. I know a lot of you experience low supply, feel like you have low supply, hear a lot about low supply. Is a kind of some ways that it can happen slowly over time, and then there's ways that it can happen quite quickly. It does vary from woman to woman, so everybody's supply is different. There definitely are people out there who have low supply, and there's definitely people out there who have massive amounts of supply, and then there's people out there who have just regular normal supply, and they make exactly what their baby needs, and they don't really pump or have any extra, and that's completely normal, and that's just what you want as a pumping or breastfeeding mother. On average, you want to be able to make about 25 to 35 ounces a day for your baby. And now that's between 1 to 6 months of age. After that, once you start introducing solids, it gets a little bit different just because they are sort of replacing those feeds with other foods. But we're not really talking about those times. We're talking about 1 to 6 months of age for babies. Low milk supply can actually happen from a couple different things, but one of the main things is not having skin to skin in those first hour after birth, and not having good milk removal. So that could either be you're not putting the baby to breast enough, the baby's not effectively taking milk out of the breast well, and if you're pumping, you're just not pumping enough. Your flange size might be too big or too small, and you're not pumping for long enough. It can be a couple of different things. But one of those main things is that skin to skin that first hour after birth is super, super important because it regulates their heart rate and temperature, and it gets all those hormones going, which is really what breastfeeding is all about in those first couple of weeks. Is it's hormone based, so it's not the negative feedback system. Hormones are what is keeping your milk supply going. That, and also effective feeds and feeding often, but at the beginning your milk supply is driven by the hormones. So in those first couple of weeks, especially that first 2-week window postpartum, you really want to put your baby to breast or pump as much as you can. So for exclusively pumping, you want to pump every 2 to 3 hours and pump at least 1 to 2 times at night. If you can just get 1 time at night, that's fine too. You also want to make sure you're properly sized so that your flange size is correct. If you have a flange that's too small or too big, you're not going to be getting all of that milk out there. That will then tell your body, oh, don't make as much because there's still some in here. You really want that perfect flange size. And then when it comes to breastfeeding, every time that your baby is displaying any type of hunger cue, or especially rooting, putting their hands in their mouth, crying, put them to breast. Really, those first couple of weeks, that first full month postpartum, baby should really be at your breast all the time. And what they're doing is they are creating your milk supply. A lot of first-time moms get confused, or they don't understand why the baby is crying all the time, why they seem like they're hungry all the time. It's mainly because, number one, they are hungry, and number two, they're trying to create your milk supply. So the more you put them to breast at the beginning, the better, the more milk you should get. If you don't do those things, that's where your milk supply can really start to falter, not right away, but in the future. And for some people, it can drastically change overnight. If you're not putting the baby to breast enough, and it's like the first 2 to 3 weeks, you may actually notice a significant decrease in your supply right away. That kind of depends on the person. So that's why I always say put them to breast for anything. If they seem hungry, if they wake up, put them to the breast. It's not going to hurt them. All it's going to do is just create really great milk supply for you. That being said, there is kind of a teetering thing on creating an oversupply, but that also does regulate itself once the hormones stop and the negative feedback comes into play. One of the other things that can really affect milk supply is tongue tie. Your baby could possibly have a tongue tie, and that could really affect the milk transfer. And if they're not effectively transferring the milk, so taking the milk out of the breast, then it's essentially telling your body not to make as much milk because there's still milk left in your breast. I can assess for tongue ties, and I can also do them virtually. So if that's something that you do need to have checked out, definitely reach out to me and we can set up a virtual visit for you. It's a real simple procedure and it can really, really help with milk supply and also weight gain issues. Another thing is bottles. So a bottle isn't bad. If you want to give a bottle of breast milk or give a bottle of formula, that's fine. But if you want to keep breastfeeding and you give a bottle, you want to replace that bottle with a pump, just to make sure that you're keeping up that supply. But those first 1 to 4 months, you really want to make sure that you're keeping up with the supply if you do replace a breastfeeding session with a bottle. As for pumping, it's kind of the same thing. If you skip a pump, you're going to be getting a lot more milk usually on that next pump, but you want to make sure that you don't do that for too many days in a row, unless you're planning to drop a pump, because your milk supply will go down slightly. And if you keep doing that, it'll kind of keep going down. So say you're starting out breastfeeding and it's going really great. You're putting baby to breast and everything's kind of going well with that. And then they're sort of getting to 5 months, 4 to 5 months, 6 months, and you're sort of noticing hey, it doesn't seem like I have a really big supply, and baby is getting more active and you're putting baby down more, and they're playing a little bit more independently, and you're sort of not breastfeeding as much. So some of that is normal. Some of it can also start to cycle where you're not really offering the breast, and so the baby will get very upset and frustrated and kind of crying, and then you're sort of what's going on? What's wrong with you? And then you're oh, they probably want to feed. So it sort of becomes this cycle of they have to kind of convince you that they need to feed, so you're not really offering the breast enough for them to be oh yeah, I want to eat, because sometimes they do get distracted and stuff like that. And some of them do make up for that at night, but some of them don't. So sometimes it is something to sort of keep an eye out if you notice yourself, not giving enough time to offering the breast, and then you're sort of wow, it does kind of seem like my supply is low. Maybe I should offer a couple more nursing sessions during the day. Another thing people think of for low supply is my breasts aren't full anymore, so I must not have any milk. And that will happen after the hormones stop and the negative feedback system starts up. So your breasts will start to feel not as full and swollen because your body's not overproducing milk so that there is enough milk, if that makes sense. Your supply is still there. Keep offering the breast and keep exclusively pumping. Maybe add a pump or two. If you're really, really nervous about it, add a couple more nursing sessions. A big indicator of low supply is a weight gain. Usually, weight gain won't be very good. And also baby's mood. So if baby is screaming and super upset after a breastfeeding session, that can indicate that there's a transfer issue, which could indicate a milk supply issue. One of the things that you can do to increase your supply is power pumping and also putting the baby to breast more often. There is another kind of thing called triple feeding, which a lot of mothers experience in those first couple of weeks. It's where you put the baby to breast with either a S&S system, so like the little tube that goes down and you kind of have like the milk here. You put them to the breast, they take as much as they want, and then you pump after they feed, and then you feed that bottle. Or maybe you don't pump, maybe you use formula, but you're essentially feeding 3 times. So you're nursing at breast, you're pumping, and then you're using that pumped milk to feed them from the bottle. And so that can get really tiring, but that is a way to help increase baby's weight. Also, it can help increase your supply a little. Usually you add more pumping sessions than nursing sessions, and you also add power pumping too. With exclusively pumping, a lot of times it's just adding those pumping sessions and then making sure that your flange size is correct. Calorie intake, that's also a big thing with breastfeeding at the breast too, is that you really want to make sure that you're taking in enough calories and drinking enough water as well, because you want to be able to support the extra nutrients that you need for the breast milk and for yourself. Supplements do help. It's kind of a hit or miss thing. I always suggest taking one galactagogue at a time. So if you're going to take the milk thistle or goat's rue, just take one. Don't take a combination, because it's harder to figure out which one your body responds better to. Low milk supply is something that's really stressful and can be really upsetting for both mother and baby. Even if you're exclusively pumping, it can be really upsetting to see those ounces that you wish you had. It's definitely hard not to compare yourself to other pumping mothers or breastfeeding mothers. If you're seeing they're breastfeeding and they have tons of extra milk, that can be really hard to see. I highly recommend reaching out to either myself or a local IBCLC or lactation consultant. If you are experiencing low milk supply, we can definitely troubleshoot it. We can just have a virtual visit. We can kind of get a brief history, see how your birth was, see if you have any underlying health conditions that can contribute to low milk supply. That's kind of another thing too, is that you could actually have certain disorders or diseases that could actually affect milk supply. So like diabetes, a lot of people with diabetes can actually suffer from low milk supply. People with PCOS, if you had a really traumatic birth and lost a ton of blood, is kind of a couple history things that can play a part in low milk supply. Something that's kind of positive with low milk supply is that if you have suffered from low milk supply, every subsequent pregnancy/birth actually should increase your breast tissue, which then should increase your supply with each pregnancy and birth. So that is kind of something to look forward to if your first baby didn't do well at the breast and you were suffering from low milk supply. But it is more likely that you'll have a better breastfeeding experience your second time. That's not guaranteed, of course, but it is more likely that you would have a better breastfeeding experience. In general, that was sort of what this video was supposed to be about, was just kind of the general ones on low milk supply. But I highly recommend reaching out to myself if you do feel like you're suffering from low milk supply. We could definitely do some troubleshooting, see if you have any underlying issues, see if baby could possibly be not transferring great. If you're experiencing low milk supply while exclusively pumping, definitely reach out to me. I experienced that while exclusively pumping. It could be super upsetting, and we could definitely troubleshoot that together as well. I will have all that linked down below. But I hope you guys enjoyed today's video. And if you have any other video requests, definitely leave them down below. And I will see you guys in my next.